everyone back? Well, I know I ended on a rather dark and dismal note, but I think that the earmark of being willing to go on the authentic spiritual journey is the willingness to undergo suffering and pain, to face it, and to face it fearlessly, but to face it. Perhaps not always fearlessly. To recognize that the dark side in us can erupt at the most amazing moments. Don't think that it can't erupt. Yes. And we have to be ready to face the eruptions. You see, don't think that, we're all sitting here nice and calm, and we give nice answers, and we think, oh no, I'm a perfectly good person. Have you ever been angry? Is there anyone who hasn't been in a rage at some time? Well, maybe not, but, Have you ever had a frightening dream? A kind of nightmare? Have you ever felt terror? Real fear? An uncontrollable reaction to something? And you wondered afterwards, why did I feel that way? The usual first reaction, of course, after seeing one's eruption, as it were, one's personal evil, is to feel a tremendous guilt and shame. We want to hide it, Everyone has a dark nature, and it's compounded of these four elements, really. And it will be faced again and again and again. Don't think that it's over. Light on the Path tells you. I should have brought Light on the Path, and I meant to bring Voice of the Silence, but I didn't. But both of these books, but Light on the Path will tell you to the battle again and again that it has to be fought over and over and over. Everyone has a dark nature. It's a condition of existence as part of the evolutionary journey. And we have to heal our own illness. We have to bring the injured area of ourselves back into the light. Not always easily done. We have to heal those dark spots. And yet, we have to be aware that to be fully human, we cast a shadow. In the Grail legends, I always feel that Galahad was a kind of cardboard saint. He didn't cast a shadow. Lancelot is far more interesting, you see. And in the Grail stories, Lancelot is so interesting because, he says that again and again I went down this road of failure. The devil tempted me. It's wonderful. That which I would do, that I do not do. St. Paul knew it, didn't he? That which I would, I do not, and that which I would not, that I do, and so on. This dark side, this shadow side, has to be met again and again and again. And that's where in the teachings of the spiritual path, as I say, such as Light on the Path, it's said that you may think the battle is won, but it arises again in another form. It arises in new ways, and at times most unexpectedly. So we have to look at it. It's been said that if you undertake the spiritual journey in earnest, you will be confronted by your dark side. The spiritual quest is a dangerous one. All the texts tell us. And we have to acknowledge these images of darkness, the images of devils and dragons, of dark and angry gods. You see, by Odysseus tempted by his first blunder of going off, and because he was so proud of his victory and he could do anything, and taking his 12 ships and 144 men and sailing to Ismaris to loot it, and it was a detour on the way home, you see. Well, why not? Here is this peaceful people, I'll go and take what they have, and I'll have even more loot to take home. What happens? He angers the god Poseidon, you see, who then whips up the ocean, you see. This is the myth, but we anger the gods at times by our attempt. Because in one sense, what we are doing on this spiritual journey is going in a new direction when everything within us, from the theosophical point of view, everything within us is seeking to come into further experience of the manifested world, you see. And we are attempting to bring about a new condition, a new being. So in some of the great images, some of the great images of light and dark appear in the writings of the Gnostics. I can't pursue it in detail, of course, in the time keeps going faster than I had hoped for, but there it is. We have to deal with it, the time factor. But one of the major Gnostic documents, which was part of that great Nag Hammadi library that was discovered in Egypt, as you know, great Gnostic works, is that of the Gospel of Philip, wonderful gospel, in which we find the symbolic image of the bridal chamber as a metaphor for transformation. And of course, the Gospel of Philip has been called primarily a manual of Gnostic sacramental theology. And according to the Gospel of Philip, one of the sayings of Jesus, which is the basis of the Gnostic mysteries, the Lord worked all things as a mystery, a baptism and an anointing and a Eucharist and a redeeming and a bride chamber. Now, in later theological sacramental work, the bride chamber was omitted. But notice the order of this, you see, according to the saying of Jesus. A baptism. Now, it's interesting that baptism is often by two elements, isn't it? Fire and water, all right? Baptism by water, either immersion or water poured on the head and so on, which is, again, a very significant symbol, a marvelous image, you see. And we talk about a baptism by fire, which means going through all of the dark side, facing all of the dark side. And we are constantly being baptized by fire and by water. These are the two baptismal elements and have tremendous significance. An anointing. And what is an anointing? Again by liquid? By the oil. Oil. And with a sacred sign. A blessing, isn't it? You see. So that out of that comes this kind of, again, oil is one of the sacred elements, sacred aspects. In some of the mystery schools, it's butter or cheese. These are all related as symbols, and you will find this when we come to the story of Lucius Apuleius, which I hope we'll come to, maybe tomorrow. Probably won't get to it today. It happens to be my favorite one, so I may leave it towards the end, you see. But as he sets out, he meets a merchant of cheese and honey, two elements. But its anointing is a blessing. We are blessed by our own baptism, as it were. We are inwardly blessed by meeting these shadow sides by willing to be baptized. An anointing, a Eucharist. And what is a Eucharist? Mm-hmm. It's a communion. It's a celebration, isn't it? It's a real celebration, isn't it? It's a real celebration. It's a communing, you see. Very interesting.
Anointing.
Oh, yes. I knew there was something wrong. Thank you. Yes. We'll get it right yet. We'll get it right. We'll start over. I haven't been often anointed, you see. Does that look better? That looked better. Good. Only for the camera. I don't want to think that I'm ignorant about that, you see. And then a Eucharist, a redeeming, and a bride chamber. This is very interesting in the Gospel of Philip, you see. Here are the basic sacraments, the basic images of the process through the journey. And it's that image of the bride chamber or bridal chamber that I find very interesting. We have in that image the metaphor of transformation. So I'm rather leaping in a sense, but I think it's all right. One of the fundamental mythologisms or mythological motifs in the Gnostic tradition concerns the division separating the human personality and the higher self. It's sometimes called our twin angel, you see. And out of it has come what is often thought of as the doctrine of twin souls, of which Plato spoke, where, and people spend their lives searching the world for, you're my twin soul. Forget it. Forget it. What is hinted at by Plato, and certainly in the Gospel of Philip and in the esoteric side of Christianity, yes, we have a twin angel, but it's within ourselves. The union must take place within ourselves. The image of the bride chamber, as it's found in the Gospel of Philip, for example, provides the metaphor for the spiritual marriage, hieros gamos, it is often called, reunification of these two aspects of ourselves. We leave nothing behind. How wonderful it would be to leave the whole personality behind and soar off into the wild blue yonder. But that is not what happens. The mystery of the bride chamber, obtained by the individual while still in incarnation, joins us with a realm of supernal bliss and transcendence. Let me read you a rather lengthy quote from the Gospel of Philip, because I think it's very interesting to see it in this light. Everyone who becomes an offspring of the bride chamber will receive the light. If anyone does not partake of it while he is in this world, he will not partake of it in the other place. Exactly the Theosophical view. One who has partaken of that light will not be seen, nor can such a one be detained, and none shall be able to afflict such a one, even if he should abide in the world. And again, when he departs from the world, he has already received the truth in the aspect of the images. The world has become the eon already. For the eon is for such a one a pleroma, and it is in this manner it is disclosed to such a one alone, not hidden in the darkness and the night, but hidden in a perfected day and a sacred light. Isn't that a beautiful passage? So I recommend that if you want to read something truly beautiful, read the Gospel of Philip. And the final sacrament in Philip's language is described in this way. The bride chamber is concealed, It is the Holy of Holies. There is a glory that is superior to glory. There is a power which is above power. Thus the perfect things are revealed to us, and so are the hidden things of the truth. And the holy things of the holy are disclosed, and the bride chamber calls unto us to enter. Now it's interesting to also note that bridal chamber is reflected within the physical brain. This is the interesting thing. It's the corpus callosum in that sense. Within the physical mechanism, we have an analogy for all of these great teachings, these mystical teachings. Put it this way, the crucifixion, which is not one of the sacraments, you see, but is a stage on the journey. These are the sacraments celebrating, as it were, the achievement at each particular stage. But the crucifixion occurs again and again. And where is this crucifixion? On Golgotha, the place of the skull. Because again, that is there is an analogy within the physical brain. And the same place that is the crucifixion becomes the bride chamber. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. So what is aimed at, I think, in this image, or by the use of this metaphor for the spiritual journey, is what we can call a kind of psychic androgenation. The bride chamber exists in order to reestablish that primordial unity that once existed. Psychologically, the separation is reflected in each one of us, and so part of the spiritual journey is concerned with the union of the masculine and feminine aspects of ourselves, all present. The image is a powerful one, and in one of the sayings in Philip, we're told that true humanity is remade in the bride chamber. So, as I've said, our work is to find our own images, to discover the metaphors that are most meaningful to us, and we can be helped by looking at some of the images which have been found meaningful to others. Particularly helpful, as I've already pointed out, which I at least have found, is meditating on some of the great visions or illuminations of that great 11th century mystic, Hildegard of Bingen. I've become fascinated with Hildegard, but then I've fascinated with all of these people because each of them tells us a story. Hildegard, of course, was a writer. She was a musician. We have some of her music still. Fascinating, beautiful. She was an administrator. She was a poet. She was a friend of popes, and she didn't hesitate to write to the Pope and tell him what she thought. She was a scientist. She was a physician. She was a remarkable person, if you want to study the life of Hildegard of Bingen in the 11th century. Absolutely tremendous woman. Her most striking and original metaphor in her writings was what she called viriditas, the greening power. Green power. You think it's new today? You think it's new today, the greens? She talked about the greening power, the green. And she said, all of creation is showered with greening refreshment, the vitality to bear fruit. Viriditas, she said, is God's power manifest in the created world of nature. It is fruitfulness, growth, creativity. And so she wrote, to quote her, in the beginning, all creatures were green and vital. They flourished amidst flowers. Later, the green figure itself came down. And there are many, many legends in Scotland, for example, about the green man, you see. Wonderful, you see. This is an ancient image again. So think about it, the greening. We need that. Because all this rain in New Zealand will bring about it, but it doesn't bring about it so fast in California. She called Jesus greenness incarnate. Greenness incarnate. And Mary was known to her as the Veridissima Verga, the greenest of all green pastures, green branches in God's orchard, full of the greening power of springtime. So another of her images, which I've also very much loved, and I'm giving you a lot of these images because I hope you're getting your own image, as it were. You're finding your own image, you see. One of her statements, listen, there was once a king sitting on his throne. Around him stood great and wonderfully beautiful columns ornamented with ivory, bearing the banners of the king with great honor. Then it pleased the king to raise a small feather from the ground, and he commanded it to fly. The feather flew, not because of anything in itself, but because the air bore it along. Thus am I. I reach my hands up to God, so that I am held by him like a feather that is carried weightless on the wind. And so she called herself a feather on the breath of God. Beautiful, you see. Well, this is absolute confidence, isn't it? That one can be a feather, which is nothing. You see, she also used the image of a tent or a kite to refer to divine wisdom, that we are all enclosed in a tent, which is divine wisdom. And she used the same image to symbolize the body and the earthly dwelling place of the soul as a tent, you see, in which the body is nurtured, as it were. She had a number of images. So it's how we see the journey. Are we aware of its dark moments, as well as of its times of light and ecstasy? What are the peak experiences, you see? Do we often, I have a kind of, I'm using my own experiences as a kind of example. I hope you don't mind. But I have a kind of theory that if I fly too high, I'm going to sink too low, you know. Life goes on beautifully and then crash. Something's going to happen, sort of thing. Icarus, yes. So, but anyway, it's interesting. I think we all, whether we know it or not, we develop these images of our lives. We develop these ways of perceiving the whole journey. What do we see along the way as we journey? You know, there's the wonderful Taoist statement that before enlightenment, trees were seen as trees, mountains as mountains. After enlightenment, trees were seen as trees, and mountains were seen as mountains. It's not that trees become mountains, in other words, as we move along, conscious of our traveling, but rather there's a new perception. We look with new eyes. And I really feel that when we find our own image, it stays with us. If we really find our own image, it stays with us, and it takes on new meaning all the time. It expands, it grows. The archetype grows. So we have to begin to look at that image to really understand it. One of the things that in the Odyssey happens, you remember, is that once that Odysseus has entered into this realm, we remember first he goes to various places, and early on he comes to the land of the lotus eaters, you know. Wonderful land where you forget everything, you forget who you are, and it's marvelous. And you sort of float along in this lotus land, you see. It's really wonderful. Jean Houston uses some beautiful phrases about the lotus eaters, you see. It's a Lethe-like metaphor of forgetfulness, you see. It tells us, in a sense, to come to this land is to sort of turn ourselves inwards in a kind of dreamy state. And we'd rather like to stay there, forever. We'd just really like, it's so pleasant, Often, we can just sort of fall asleep and eat this flowery fruit, and it's wonderful. And we get people who are, sort of, I call them wafty, they waft off into isn't life beautiful, and they're always walking 6 feet above the ground sort of thing, in the state of Lethe, in the state of the lotus eaters. And I always want to puncture them. I want to put a pin into them, say, get down, get your feet on earth, and realize, there's something to be done, Go out and, it's like the Zen story, you see, the disciple who approached the teacher one day and said, really, won't you tell me what is truth, please, it's so beautiful here in the ashram, and please, won't you just tell me what is truth. And the master said, have you had your breakfast? And he said, well, of course I've had my breakfast, nonsense, but one does that, but, please, what is truth? And the master said, well, then go and wash your dishes. And I think some people just need to go and wash the dishes, to get on with it, sort of thing. But you see, he's entered this mythic space, this mythic time and space. And then they now embark. It's from that Odysseus is sent off on what is called the road of trials, the whole ocean voyage of trials. And of course, it's a time of incredible tests and adventures. That word adventure is very interesting. I don't have time to go into it, but that you find in the Grail legends. In one of the tales of the Grail legend, one of the retelling, virtually every chapter opens with the adventure of Gawain, the adventure of Parsifal, the adventure of Lancelot, and so on, you see. What is an adventure? And then you get poor Gawain, who says he went several days without an adventure. Well, what is an adventure, you see? Nobody goes a single moment without an adventure, really. But Gawain never had the eyes to see it. He didn't know that it was an adventure, you see. The problem was. But that's an interesting word. I won't go into it now. And so now he comes to the cave of the Cyclops, you see. Now he's really forced into an awakefulness, and he's forced here in the cave of the Cyclops to lose his identity. Incidentally, you know the word Odysseus, you know what it means in Greek? In Greek, it means trouble. That's why I decided we're all Odysseans. We're all troubles to ourselves. That's what the word really means. He was named Trouble. And that's the meaning of the word Odysseus, is trouble. Nothing but trouble. And that's what happens, you see. He's always stirring up trouble or facing trouble. But it's in the cave of the Cyclops that he learns one of the great lessons of disidentification. He cannot say who he is. He doesn't dare say who he is, does he? Doesn't dare say who he is. And so he goes through this whole process of disidentification, as it were, of no longer being Odysseus, you see. The whole story is very interesting. Let me try with you a little experiment. We have the time, I think, to do this. If you would just take a relaxed position and close your eyes. And listen very carefully to my words. very, very carefully. Do not use your mind, but just listen very carefully. On present evidence, how many toes do you have? On present evidence, how many eyes do you have? On present evidence, what is the color of your hair? On present evidence, how heavy are you? On present evidence, how tall are you? On present evidence, who are you? All right, open your eyes. What did you discover?
Nothing. No. There's nothing there. Can't see.
How many toes did you have? How many eyes did you have? What was the color of your hair? How heavy were you? How tall were you? Interesting, isn't it? On present evidence. Very interesting to go through that kind of exercise if you really do it seriously. If you really undertake that exercise seriously. It's very interesting. It's fascinating to observe what happens to you if you really take it, because it's on present evidence.
What other evidence could there be?
That's it. You see, what evidence do we have for how many toes we have?
Mathematics and things.
But when your eyes are closed and you're sitting there quiet, on that evidence, present evidence, it's very interesting. First time I did it, I had a pain in one of the toes, and I said I had one toe because it was paining, and that was the present evidence that there was pain in one toe. You see? So I had one, but it's very interesting. The story of the Buddhist monk, one of the shall we say, one of the tests was to have on his head through a night to show that he sat absolutely still, without movement. He had a little shallow dish with a burning oil lamp, a bit of just oil burning in that shallow dish. And in the morning, when the master came in, the dish was on the floor. And the master of the ashram said, "Why is the dish on the floor?" And he said, "Because the light went out." The master said, "How did you know? How did you know that it had gone out?" So, you see, we take off the dish and look at it as the light's still burning and putting it back on, and so on, you see. So he failed the test, of course. You can't pass a test sitting there absolutely still with the light on and then know that it goes off. How do you know that it's gone off, you see? But we're always testing this sort of thing. Well, one of my favorite images, and I think there'll be time to do this before lunch, since we've talked about some of the Christian mystics, we might as well go on to other of my favorites. I have two great favorites, and you're being subjected to them. One is, of course, Hildegard, being a feather on the breath of God. How light can you be? How light can you be? Are we heavy, grounded in? We need to be grounded, but we also need to be a bit light. And can we be a feather on the breath of God? Which means to be nothing, you see. On present evidence, nothing, you see. Who are you? You know, I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell. They banish us, you know. How awful to be somebody, how public like a frog, to sit and croak your name all day to an admiring bog. So anyway, throw that in gratis. But my other favorite, of course, is Saint Teresa and her great work, Saint Teresa of Avila, and her great work, the most profound, one of the most amazing series of images based on a profound metaphor is in Saint Teresa's work, The Interior Castle. Now, the castle itself is a kind of crystal globe, as it were, which is entered by the soul, the pilgrim, who is seeking the center. And so there is the center, where sits the king, as it were. There sits that which is to be achieved. But one does not enter directly. There are, I probably can't draw this, but that's all right, because the television people are going to make a nice graphic of this. It's entered room by room, and there are 7 concentric rooms. Let's see if we can get some of these. There. And so this is a castle, and you can imagine it rising high, you see. And how many have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so we'll come to this last one. And then, of course, there has to be some ways in. And so we'll make a few doors in it, hither and yon, kind of labyrinthine way. Something like that, you see. And so the outer environments, the outer environs all out here outside, you see. Outside, you know, what surrounds a castle? A moat. A moat, generally, doesn't it? A moat. Getting warm on this, you see. Because we're going to make a journey to the interior, you see. So the outer environs of the castle are cold and dark. The land out here is crawling with snakes and all sorts of fearful creatures. But as you enter, as you come into the castle, the atmosphere begins to change. Get in, you see. Get in to the first room. And there, in this first place, one of the startling things is that the rooms are arranged, as I say, in these 7 concentric rings or circles, each being a kind of milestone, she said, on the journey to the center where the king resides. And this is a kind of abiding place, each one of these. So you have to sort of see it rising up. I can't picture it that way, but sort of rising up, this image of, I don't know, do you have any castles in New Zealand? I suppose you do.
Yes, one.
You have one?
on it, too.
Ah, all right. Anyway, all of us have an image of a castle, and, maybe we lived in them at some time or other, so you know about castles. We have a wonderful castle in California, just up the coast from where I live, and it's called the Hearst Castle. It's built by William Randolph Hearst. And so we know what a castle looks like, more or less, in America even, believe it or not. Well, castles are not the coziest of places. Anyway, the first of these rooms is a kind of, it's a kind of place of conversion, so to speak. The rooms in this circle are closest, of course, to the outer world. Some of the darkness pervades, the moment you open the door here. Some of the snakes might get in, a cockroach or two, some flies, gnats, even a bee or a wasp might get in. You never know when you open the door, you see. But somehow you open the door, and some of the darkness, because you've got all of this to go around, you see. All of that to go around. And over here it's still pretty dark, Isn't that right? Carrying a dim light with you, perhaps, just the dim light of your being. So it's still, creepy, crawly things are there, fearful. They've invaded the rooms of this first ring. And although while you were outside, you heard a dim voice calling you, according to her, you see. You heard this, you listened, you were attentive, you listened. So you managed to find an entry, and there are also kinds of rooms here in each circle. And so the voice is sort of, you hear what happens when you get in there. There's a lot of sound from outside still, sort of clashing and clanging out there, knocking against the walls, you see. So it's not easy to be attentive to that inner voice, to follow the inner calling. So there's a lot of negative aspects that enter in. We become aware of ourselves in a new way. Now you're inside the first room, but serpents and devils appear to haunt us and even discourage us. And it's a real test as to whether we go on or not, you see. That maybe it's not so easy in this first room even. So here we are, a kind of conversion is taking place where we become aware that really we'd better face ourselves. And in that sense, this first room, this first circle, with all of its rooms, brings us a certain humility. She says, you see, because you have to face yourself. Who are you? Who are you amidst all of this? On present evidence, who are you? You see, sort of thing. So at this very beginning, you begin to sort of face yourself. Do I want to go on? I rather don't hear this voice. Maybe it's better to suffer the terrors of the night that I already know than to go on into the terrors of the unknown. Better to bear the ills I have than those I do not know as yet, you see. It's really a very difficult sort of feeling. But now there's awakening to a personal call. And so in traveling around, where did we find the entrance into the second room? Here we are. Suddenly, we discover we're able to enter into the second set of rooms, actually. The second set of rooms, where she says there is an awakening to a personal call. One begins to enter consciously into a relationship with the divine. Now, it's interesting at this stage, St. Teresa makes an interesting statement about this second set of rooms, this second circle, this second ring. It's easier a bit to hear the voice of the king, she calls it, voice of the inner self. She says, hearing his voice is a greater trial than not hearing it. Hearing his voice is a greater trial than not hearing it. You can still turn back, of course, you're not that far in, but there's a pull to continue inward. A clearer commitment to the task of the journey is demanded. It's this stage that indeed it's often referred to, she refers to it, as finding one's vocation. Or finding one's own vocation. And this is the calling, a law now from which one cannot escape. We have to follow the law of our own being, if you like. So we now, in this, begin to find where is this entry into the third set of rooms, the third ring, this third circle. And in the third set of apartments or rooms, the quest now, which has been somewhat restless, we're not quite sure, begins to settle. We begin to settle down. We become quiet. There's a gentleness. In this third area, we take up the task in earnest. There's now a definite commitment. By this time, a definite commitment. She says, this is what occurs in this third one. We're committed to the journey. We've gotten this far, we might as well continue, you see. But we're really committed. At the same time, the tensions between the inner and the outer have grown stronger. There's really a point we reach in our lives when the tensions, the pulls outward and the pulls inward, have become so strong that we're really in conflict, as it were. It's an ambiguous existence that we live. There's a kind of awkwardness about it, and yet there's a genuine commitment. And one discovers at this point that simply leading the good life is not enough, that there has to be this commitment. It's interesting, again, to note St. Teresa's comment. I didn't bring her book. I couldn't carry everything, but read The Interior Castle. It's very interesting. If humility is lacking, we will remain here our whole life, and with 1,000 afflictions and miseries. For since we will not have abandoned ourselves, this stage, the third stage she's referring to, will be very laborious and burdensome. We shall be walking weighed down with the mud of our human misery, which is not so with those who ascend to the remaining rooms. So you can't overstay in this set of apartments, in this third circle of the castle. It may seem that all is peace and stability, but we soon find that it is indeed simply stagnation. It's the land of the lotus eaters, and we have to go on. So the fourth mansions, in a sense, are a continuation, but it's also a clear transition. So we ultimately are pushed onwards into the fourth set. And this, again, is a very clear transition. It's interesting that in almost all spiritual disciplines, the fourth is a turning point, always, for us. The fourth, you know, in the stages of consciousness in the Hindu tradition, the fourth, there are three stages, the waking state, Jagrat, the sleeping state, the deep sleep, and then the Turiya state. And the word Turiya in Sanskrit simply means fourth, nothing else. It's a transition. This is a period now of genuine transition. in this fourth set of apartments, in the fourth circle. It's a clear transition. A process of interiorization is now taking hold. Not always comfortable. Still not at all comfortable. There's an increase of recollectedness, in which we become more aware of our quest. Again, listen to what St. Teresa says about this. One noticeably senses a gentle drawing inward. The senses and exterior things seem to be losing their hold because the soul is recovering what it has lost. And then she adds, without any effort or noise, the soul should strive to cut down the rambling of the intellect, but not suspend either it or the mind. So it's a stage not only of transition, but of recollectedness. Time of recollection. She uses an interesting analogy at this fourth stage, a very interesting analogy, to characterize, in fact, the difference between the third and fourth circles. She says there are two troughs of water. The first one is filled laboriously with great effort, but the second one is over a spring and is filled effortlessly. It's an interesting analogy that she uses. It fills easily and naturally. It's apparent that the inner journey now, you're over this spring, as it were. And the spring is from deep within. So that while through the first three stages, there's been real effort. Now it's, in a sense, it's effortless. That the inner journey, once it's begun in earnest, a more powerful center begins to arise. From the Jungian point of view, the new center, as it were, is now drawing you inwards. This has been an effort in which we have pushed ourselves inwards, as it were, with effort, constant practice. But here we really recollect the recollectedness in this circle. And that's why it's a transition. And so, while in one sense, up to this point, we have pushed ourselves, you see, we have pushed ourselves with effort, now something is drawing us, you see. Something is pulling us towards that, you see. So that now the thrust, there's a moment of change where we have thrust ourselves, and now the thrust is from above, do you see?
Point of no return. Point of no return.
Point of no return. Yeah, believe me, there's a point of no return. So from her point of view, the fifth, sixth, and seventh circles constitute the true journey. The first three, we really have to work for. We have to make the effort. We have to face all of the perils. We have to really see if we're hearing the voice. The fourth is transition, a recollectedness, which is to recollect ourselves. You see, the self. And now we're really on the way. And it's very interesting that in almost all of the traditions, you see, the early stages are preparation. In Patanjali's yoga, these are known as Kriya Yoga, the preparatory stages. It's not real yoga, yama, niyama, all of the others, the first stages, which are the 8 limbs of yoga. These are known as Kriya Yoga. They are preparatory. They are not the true yoga. Yoga is in the final stages, you remember. The final limbs of yoga, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Those are the final 3. That's the real journey. The rest is preparation. Most of us don't like being prepared, We want to jump right into it. And so, we stop. Yoga is just a lot of, all of this sort of thing. Posture is important, yes, and asanas and so on, all of that, yes. But what is really, these are all preparatory. Get us ready for it. And so her first three are preparatory. We push ourselves. But the fifth, sixth, and seventh constitute the true pilgrimage. So she likens the fifth, which is wonderful. The wonderful image is that now this is a stage of the cocoon, she calls it. It's the stage, the fifth is the cocoon. And the analogy she uses, of course, is that of the experience of the silkworm that dies in the cocoon to emerge as a butterfly. So the fifth circle, there's a radical change. She calls it, and as I say, she depicts it in terms of the changes experienced by a silkworm who spins a cocoon around itself only to emerge later as a butterfly. And so, in a sense, this fifth mansion is the cocoon. So the self dies to itself. The old self must die. The experience is indeed like dying. The silkworm entombs itself in the cocoon that it has spun. It's a state of consciousness that's not an escape from the world, not at all, or an isolation, but the cocoon experience involves a genuine dying to the personal consciousness. And so any separation, you see what happens in a cocoon. Nothing is injected from outside that says you're not going to be a butterfly. Nothing is lost. But all of the organs of the silkworm are dissolved into a kind of amorphous mass, a glutinous mass, and a new ordering takes place. This analogy has been used. It's used by Plato. It's used by many mystics, isn't it, you see? A totally new being emerges. A totally new being. And so in the sixth mansion, which follows very swiftly, in the sixth mansion, we have the butterfly. A totally new being. A totally new being emerges, you see. She says, she describes it as a fire in the heart, a time of final purification, a time of great rapture. And so she says, now there is joy, but there is also hard work, because now one is really alone. You know, the butterfly is alone in all of space, you see. It's the flight of the alone to the alone. And so there is this feeling now that you're committed so committed because you're changed. And there's a pain in the solitude, she says, which seems impossible to sustain. But she recommends that at this stage, there arises a loving behavior. There's an expanded consciousness. One sees the whole because one can embrace the whole. So she says, here the person deepens his caritas, his loving behavior. So it's that relationships are now deeper, but they're unpossessive. And in the final ring, one comes to the center, and there is the experience of union. But the amazing thing that happens in this, the absolutely amazing thing that happens, because now there is the union, the ecstasy, one perceives the center, one is the center, and here one finds a most amazing thing, that while from the fourth on, this has pulled us up, this has taken us forward, this has pulled us inward, we find that this has two aspects. and it thrusts us back out into the world. Amazing. So we have an image here that we are propelled, we've been drawn there by a magnetic force, as it were, into the very flame of being. She speaks of it, and it's interesting, Teresa speaks of it as the Gospel of Philip did. She speaks of it as a betrothal in which the lovers are as two unique candles whose flames are joined as one. That's the metaphor she uses there. So it's the bride chamber, you see. And now you're at the inner circle, you see. But there is a propelling force, and one is projected outwards. Love is so great. The love that has brought about the union is so great that it's a force that thrusts you into the world. Wonderful, because one does not become lost in it, you see. Just as in the bride chamber of St. Philip, the Gospel of Philip, there is then the birth of a new humanity out of that. Here there is the birth of a new being who is thrust into the world to act in the world out of love, true peace, the peace that is beyond understanding, the openness and the emptiness, deeply sensitive to the joyousness. So one is aware of the suffering of the world, but one is joyous, ecstatic, as one is thrust outwards with genuine love, to be in the world, be a presence in the world. And so it's a marvelous analogy, I think. We have so many images here. The images of the serpents and the dark devils remind us of the darkness that we experience on the journey. The image of the butterfly reminds us of the newness that may come even out of the darkness. And so now the merging two candles into one, but in that flame is also that supreme ecstasy and love which carries us into the world to be a beneficent force in the world. This is the journey as St. Teresa saw it. Well, I've taken us to 12:30, which is time for lunch, sorry, but it doesn't give you any time. And we reconvene this afternoon at 1:45.